The gym's hum of clanking weights and the rhythmic beat of running machines filled the air as Jasmine pushed through the front doors, eager to start her workout. As always, she had a goal in mind. Fitness wasn't just a hobby for her. It was a way to reclaim control over her life, a way to prove to herself that she could rise above whatever life threw her way. But what she didn't expect that day was to walk into a storm that would challenge everything she thought she knew about the gym and the people who ran it. Her routine had always been simple. Early mornings, intense sessions, followed by a quick smoothie before heading to work. This gym had been her sanctuary, a space to push limits, to escape. But as she approached the front desk, she noticed something was off. The receptionist, usually warm and friendly, had a tense look on her face. Jasmine shrugged it off. Maybe she was just having a bad day. But then the gym manager, Greg, stood up from behind the desk with a smirk that made Jasmine's stomach twist. "Jasmine, right?" he asked, his voice dripping with forced politeness. "You've been a regular here for quite a while, but we've had a few complaints about you." Jasmine's heart sank. Complaints? She couldn't fathom what she could have possibly done wrong. She always kept to herself, followed the gym rules, and made sure not to disturb others. "What kind of complaints?" she asked, her voice steady, but with a tinge of concern. Greg's eyes narrowed as he leaned forward, his smirk growing. "You're not really fitting the image we want for our gym anymore. You're slowing down the vibe here. So we've decided to cancel your membership." The words hung in the air like a slap across her face. Jasmine's first instinct was to laugh, thinking he had to be joking. But the look in his eyes told her otherwise. This was no joke. The gym, her sanctuary, was rejecting her, pushing her out. She tried to process what he was saying, but the anger started building up inside her chest, thick and hot. "I've been a member here for years," Jasmine replied, her voice rising with the frustration that had started bubbling inside her. "I've never caused any issues. This is crazy. Why are you doing this?" Greg, unfazed, just shrugged. "It's nothing personal. We're just trying to keep things, well, fresh, you know. Maybe try a new place, somewhere more your style." His tone was condescending, and Jasmine felt the sting of his words even more. But what stung the most was how he seemed to be enjoying this moment, like a predator toying with his prey. Jasmine took a deep breath, trying to keep her composure. She'd faced discrimination before, but this felt different. This wasn't just about her fitness level. It was about something deeper. She could see it in Greg's eyes, the way he looked at her, as if she didn't belong. But what he didn't know was that she had a few tricks up her sleeve, something he would never see coming. You see, Jasmine wasn't just any gym-goer. She wasn't the woman he assumed she was, the one who could be dismissed without a second thought. What Greg didn't know, what no one knew, was that she was the new owner of the gym. The gym that had been her second home, the one she had fought for and finally bought. The deal had been finalized just the day before, and she was now in complete control. But she had chosen not to reveal it yet. She wanted to see how people treated her before she pulled the curtain back. With a calmness that surprised even her, Jasmine smiled at Greg. "You know what, Greg? I think it's time we had a little chat about your future here." His puzzled expression only fueled her confidence as she reached into her bag and pulled out a document, slapping it down on the counter in front of him. "I'm actually the new owner. So about that membership." Greg's eyes widened, and for the first time, the arrogance faltered in his stance. He stammered, trying to find his words, but Jasmine didn't give him the satisfaction of responding immediately. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, enjoying the discomfort slowly spreading across his face. "How does it feel now?" she asked, her voice soft but dripping with meaning. "To know that the very person you just mocked is the one who owns everything you've been taking for granted." The tables had turned, and Greg's smug expression had been replaced with confusion and panic. Jasmine watched as he tried to scramble for some sort of explanation, but she wasn't interested in hearing it. The reality of the situation was that Greg was about to learn a lesson he'd never forget. The power dynamics had shifted, and Jasmine had no plans of letting him off easy. But there was one more thing that Jasmine hadn't expected when she walked in that day. Behind Greg, another figure had appeared. A man she didn't recognize, his face tense and unblinking. He had been watching the whole exchange, and as their eyes met, a shiver ran down her spine. Who was he? And why was he standing there, silent and observing everything? The question lingered in the air, unanswered. Jasmine's next move would determine everything. But for now, she was left standing there, with Greg visibly sweating and the mysterious figure watching her every move, as the suspense hung in the air. What would happen next? Jasmine felt a cold shiver creep down her spine as the mysterious man stood there, silent and unblinking, his gaze never wavering from her. He was tall, with dark eyes that seemed to pierce through her, as if he was studying her every move. His presence was unsettling, and for a moment she questioned if maybe she had walked into something much larger than she had initially realized. But she quickly pushed the thought aside. She wasn't here to be intimidated. She wasn't here to back down. This gym, this fight, it was hers now. She shifted her focus back to Greg, who was still fumbling with his words. His smug expression had completely vanished, replaced by a look of desperation. He didn't know how to handle this situation. Jasmine could see it in his eyes. She could feel the power in her hands now, and it was intoxicating. But there was something else nagging at her, a sense that she wasn't the only one who had something to hide. Is everything okay here? The mysterious man asked, his voice smooth and calm, a stark contrast to the tension that had filled the room. He took a step forward, his eyes flicking between Jasmine and Greg, as if assessing the situation. Greg didn't answer immediately. He seemed unsure how to respond. His eyes darted between the man and Jasmine, and then to the document she had placed on the counter. It was like he was trying to make sense of the situation, to piece together what was happening. But Jasmine could see the cracks forming in his confidence. He was losing control, and she wasn't about to give him the chance to regain it. I think we've made everything pretty clear here, Jasmine said, her voice steady but laced with an edge of determination. But if you want to keep talking, we can do this all day. You'll have to explain to me why you think it's acceptable to treat me like that. The man stepped forward again, his expression unreadable. He was close now, close enough for Jasmine to feel the weight of his presence even more acutely. There was something about him that made her uneasy, but she couldn't place her finger on it. He wasn't here just for the drama. He was watching, waiting, and something told her that he was more involved in this than he was letting on. Greg, why don't you go ahead and give her a full explanation? The man said, his voice cool and almost casual. But there was something underneath it, a hint of authority, of something larger at play. It made Jasmine's stomach twist. Who was this guy, and what role did he play in all of this? Greg, still struggling to process what was happening, finally muttered something that sounded like an apology, but it was barely audible. He was rattled, his pride shattered. Jasmine almost felt bad for him, but she quickly dismissed the thought. He had made his choices, and now it was time for him to face the consequences. But as Greg shuffled away from the counter, his eyes still flicking nervously to Jasmine and the mysterious man, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than just a petty power struggle. She turned to the man, her patience running thin. Who are you, and why are you involved in this? She asked, her voice steady but filled with suspicion. What's your connection to Greg? And why are you watching this like some kind of show? The man gave her a slow smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. I'm just a concerned party, he replied, his tone deliberately vague. I like to make sure everything runs smoothly. I don't like it when people get hurt unnecessarily. His words hung in the air like a threat, though his demeanor remained calm, almost too calm. Jasmine's instincts were screaming at her to dig deeper, but she had learned long ago to be cautious about revealing too much of herself too soon. Jasmine leaned against the counter, trying to appear unaffected by his presence, though inside she was on edge. She had never liked feeling like she was being watched, especially by someone who seemed to know more than they let on. I don't need your help, she said firmly. I'm perfectly capable of handling things on my own. Greg and I, we have unfinished business. The man's smile faltered for a brief moment, but he quickly regained his composure. He looked at Greg, who was now standing off to the side, rubbing the back of his neck and glancing nervously between Jasmine and the man. "Is that so?" the man asked, his voice colder now. "You're the new owner, huh? Well, I guess we'll see how that plays out." Jasmine's heart skipped a beat at the mention of her ownership. How did he know that? She hadn't told anyone yet, except for a few key people involved in the deal. She had wanted to keep it under wraps for now, to observe how the gym ran before making any changes. But somehow, this man knew exactly who she was, and he wasn't afraid to let her know that. She tried to remain composed, but the doubt began to creep in. Who was this man, really? What did he want from her? And why had he shown up right when she was confronting Greg? Was it all just a coincidence, or was there a bigger game at play here? Greg seemed to pick up on her unease, his voice shaky as he spoke up again. "Listen, I don't know what's going on here, but I didn't know who you were when I made that decision. I didn't mean to disrespect you. It was just business. You have to understand that." Jasmine shook her head, feeling the anger rise once more. "You can't just kick people out because you don't like the way they look, or because you think they don't fit in with your image," she said, her voice rising. "I've been coming here for years, and now you're telling me that I'm not welcome. That's not how it works. You don't get to treat people like that, Greg." But before Greg could respond, the man stepped forward again, cutting him off. "Enough," he said, his voice sharp. "This has gone on long enough. Greg, I'm sure you have your reasons, but let's be clear. Things are changing now. And it's not just about what you want anymore." Jasmine couldn't help but feel a sense of dread settling over her as the man's words sank in. There was more going on here, and it wasn't just about Greg's decision to cancel her membership. The way the man spoke, the way he moved, everything about him felt calculated, deliberate. He wasn't just some casual observer. He had a stake in this, and Jasmine was starting to realize that the situation was much more complicated than she had initially thought. The air in the room grew thick with tension, and Jasmine found herself caught between the strange power play unfolding before her and the nagging feeling that she was in way over her head. What had she walked into? And what was the man's true role in all of this? As the silence stretched on, Jasmine's mind raced. She had come here for answers, but now, more than ever, she felt like she was being drawn into a web of intrigue, one that she didn't fully understand yet. But she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going down without a fight. Jasmine's mind raced as the man's cold stare fixed on her. There was an intensity to him, an unnerving stillness that seemed to pulse in the air around them. She had expected a confrontation, but this felt different. As she stood there, her heart pounding in her chest, she realized that the situation wasn't just about Greg or even the gym anymore. There was something deeper, something hidden beneath the surface. And she was right in the middle of it. The man's silence was deafening, each passing second stretching the tension even further. He hadn't made any move to explain who he was or why he was here, and that only heightened the mystery. Jasmine's gaze flickered back to Greg. It was still awkwardly standing near the side, but she could tell that he wasn't much help anymore. He was just a pawn in whatever game was being played, a pawn who had underestimated the depth of the situation. She could feel the weight of his eyes on her, the man's gaze never straying for a second. His mere presence felt like an invisible force pushing against her, testing her resolve. The cold feeling in her gut only intensified. Jasmine didn't like feeling vulnerable, and this was starting to feel like a trap, a carefully laid one. But what was the catch? "I think it's time we discuss the future," the man finally spoke, his voice cool and measured, as though he had all the time in the world. "And I think you should understand that things are about to change in ways you might not expect. You don't know the full story, Jasmine. Not yet." The mention of her name sent a chill down her spine. It wasn't just that he knew who she was, it was the way he said it, as if he knew exactly how everything was going to unfold. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but she held herself in check. She had learned over the years that reacting impulsively never helped anyone. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that there was something personal at play here, something about her past, and maybe even the gym's history that was being used against her. Greg shifted uneasily, but still didn't speak. He was caught in the middle, and she could see the fear in his eyes. His earlier bravado had dissolved, leaving behind only a man who was slowly coming to terms with the fact that he had made a mistake. But Jasmine wasn't in the mood for sympathy. This wasn't about Greg's incompetence. It was about something far bigger. "Do you know who I really am?" Jasmine asked, her voice steady, but with a bite to it. She had to break the silence, had to get something out of this cryptic conversation. "I didn't just buy this gym because it seemed like a good investment. I'm not just some random person who can be pushed around. I have a stake in this place, and I plan to take full control. So unless you plan to tell me who you are and why I should be worried, I suggest you stay out of my way." The man didn't flinch, didn't even seem surprised by her challenge. Instead, he raised an eyebrow, the hint of a smile curling at the corner of his lips. "You're right. You do have a stake here, Jasmine. But that doesn't mean you understand the whole picture. There's a lot you don't know about this gym, about its history, about the people who've come and gone." His words hung in the air, heavy and cryptic. Jasmine frowned. History. People who'd come and gone. What was he talking about? She hadn't come across anything strange during her due diligence before buying the gym. Sure, it had been struggling a bit financially, but nothing that couldn't be turned around with some work. But now, the words took on a darker turn. Jasmine couldn't ignore the sense that this was more than a simple ownership dispute. It was personal, and she was being pulled into a game she didn't fully understand. "And what exactly does that mean?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady despite the growing unease. The man paused as though considering her question. "It means that you're not the first person to think they can take control of this place. But there's something about this gym that attracts people. People who think they can fix it, change it, make it better. They come in, and they leave, and the gym remains the same." He gave a slight shrug, as if to underscore the point. "You might find yourself trapped here, Jasmine, just like everyone else." Jasmine's pulse quickened. Trapped? What did he mean by that? Was he implying that the gym had some kind of curse? That anyone who tried to own it or take control of it ended up failing? She shook her head, pushing that thought away. She wasn't about to let herself get caught up in superstitions or wild theories. She had worked too hard to get here. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, her voice a little sharper now. "Are you trying to scare me? 'Cause it's not going to work. I've dealt with far worse than this." The man's eyes flicked to Greg, who was now visibly sweating, his face pale. He looked as though he was waiting for someone to tell him what to do, someone to pull him out of the mess he had created. But Jasmine wasn't about to fall for the theatrics. She had a bigger issue to deal with. The man slowly stepped back, his eyes lingering on Jasmine. "You'll find out soon enough," he said cryptically, before turning his gaze to Greg once again. "You know what to do," he muttered, his tone now harsh and commanding. Greg hesitated, clearly still processing everything that had just unfolded. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice low, almost pleading. "I never meant for any of this to happen." The man's eyes hardened. "It doesn't matter what you meant. You've done your part. Now let's see if she's really ready to take control." With that, he turned and walked toward the exit, leaving a lingering sense of unease in his wake. Jasmine stood frozen, watching as he disappeared through the door, leaving only silence in his wake. Her mind was spinning, the pieces of the puzzle slowly starting to fall into place, but not enough for her to see the full picture. What had just happened? It was that man, and what did he know about the gym's history? What was his connection to Greg? And why had he spoken as if he knew her, knew exactly how this was going to unfold? She turned back to Greg, who was still standing there, his hands shaking. The tension in the room was palpable, and Jasmine could feel the weight of it pressing down on her chest. She wasn't going to let this go. Not now. Not when she was so close to finally taking control. But there was something deeper at work here, something that went beyond her simple ownership of the gym. She could feel it, like a thread pulling her in, leading her towards something she wasn't yet ready to face. "Greg," she said slowly, her voice colder now. "We're not done. Not by a long shot."